back.
Yeah.
We certainly are. Welcome, John.
We've got John Alexander. Looking forward to having him. And I'm going to chuck you under the bus again since we had technical issues recording. But where in the world are you, John?
Oh, chuck me under the bus. I'm on the coast of Mallorca, sunning myself like a right show off. So yeah, make me look bad before we even start. Thanks.
You must be exhausted because you've been on a bit of a tour, aren't you, promoting your book, Citizens?
Yeah, I realised that I did a bit of a tot-up just before Christmas, and I counted I've done something like 250 talks and events and stuff from March to December last year. So that was quite a stretch. So maybe I deserve a little bit of a break.
You certainly do.
I know you said the best to last, eh?
Yeah.
There you go, mate. Now I'm building to the climax. Here we go.
I've only been begging him. But one of the sort of questions we like to ask before we get into the book is, you sat around a dinner table and someone leaned over and said, "Hey, John, what is it you do? And what have you done in the past?" How would you explain that question to someone?
Yeah, I mean, I often like to talk about my journey, to use that horrible metaphor. But like, I started out my career working in the advertising industry, actually, and I basically went on a big trip of asking myself deeper and deeper questions about what the role of that industry is in the world and what I was part of. And it all stemmed back to my first boss described my job to me by saying, what you've got to remember is the average consumer sees something like 3,000 commercial messages a day, and your job is to cut through that. That was his kind of definition. And for a while, I was happy with that second part, cut through it, make mine the best, like quite a competitive lad. And then, but more and more, I started asking, what are we doing to ourselves? And we tell ourselves we're consumers constantly. And so the work I do now really is holding that question of what would it look like to bring all the kind of creativity and energy that currently goes into selling people stuff as consumers, telling people that their agency is to buy stuff and that they don't mean anything if they can't afford to, which is a bit of it. Bringing that energy and putting it into speaking to people as citizens and participants in the world and inviting them into their agency and making shaping the world for the better something that's creative and joyful and something we want to do, not something worthy and heavy.
I love that. I think also just a bit of the context in terms of the book, because I absolutely love the book. And when I first heard you talk, me and my mum often have big debates. I think mum was about 67, 68, and she looks at the world completely different to me. We always have some big debates, and we was having a debate and about the way the government's run and the way things are done. And I'd come and see you talk, and you give me a copy of your lovely book. I swiped another one. What was someone left on the table? I thought, I'm having that one, and I delivered it to my mum, and I said, read this book. Let's go out for some food and let's have a good debate around it. And one of the bits I want to lead into on this is, you've heard about the charity we help run, Andy's Man Club. And I wanted to discuss that with you around, if you could try and give us a summary over the citizens model. So the bit, if I remember rightly, it was subjects, consumers, and citizens. They're the sort of areas, and you can give us a bit more background on that. And then where I want to go into that a little bit more to link into it is, I think Andy's Man Club's been going 6 years, I think.
6.5 years.
6.5 years.
Yeah.
Just any listeners who might not be aware, we're a suicide prevention charity, and we were set up on the back of, tragically, Andy Roberts tragically took his own life without no word of warning. And the club was set up by his mum and his brother-in-law so that no family had to experience the devastation that a death by suicide brings. Now, we roll that forward. I helped set up Hull because you were struggling, weren't you, Paul?
Yep.
Which our listeners listened to it before. And the back of it, when I look at it, is I think it's a complete citizens model. I think we've opened we started just before the pandemic with about 20 clubs. We've just opened our
115 tonight.
115 clubs. We're all over the country, all in Scotland. Do you want to add to that, Paul, where we are?
Yeah, we're all over the UK. So we'll go from the top of Scotland right down to the bottom of Cornwall, all over. And last year we had 84,000 visits through our 106 clubs last year, which is absolutely amazing. And we always say it's 184,000 fathers, uncles, brothers going back home to their families. So it's not underestimated what happens. And I totally agree with Leon about the citizens model.
And I think, linking into that, John, when you look at that, your models, we're saying independent, aren't we? We're saying it's got a purpose. There's some sort of spiritual element towards that. It's about creating, facilitating. It is digital because our company took it digital. So there's an online club on there. When the pandemic came, we had to take it digital. It's about building network, and it's deliberate in terms of what we're doing. So I'd just be interesting, because people are listening and thinking, what is he on about? Citizens. Could you try and bring this round to where your idea came from and why you think it can change the world?
Yeah, so like I say, in my work, a lot of it started for me from within the advertising industry and dissatisfaction with the idea of people as consumers and going, what are we doing to ourselves when we're surrounded with this idea constantly that really says. So I think of these three, subject, consumer, and citizen, as stories of the individual in society, of what we can do and what we should do. And so the consumer story, which is like the central one, the default one, the dominant one in the world today, basically says that it starts from the assumption that humans are lazy and selfish, that we're motivated by self-interest, and that what we need to do is somehow make self-interest add up to collective interest, that the best society will result if everyone pursues that self-interest. But in it says that we're independent of one another, that we're isolated individuals, that self-interest is that motivator. And as a result, I think it keeps us separate from one another. It's an idea that says that we are independent, isolated, alone, atomized individuals. And that story, I think, it's interesting hearing you talking about your conversations with your mum, because in a lot of ways that story was born or came to prominence through the second half of the 20th century. And what it replaced when it came to prominence at that time was what I call the subject story. And the subject story says, actually, like, people are like naive, innocent, like that people, most of us need to be told what to do. Like, we should keep our heads down and do as we're told, because the God-given few who run society know best, and they'll lead us to the best society. And it, coming out of the two world wars and through the second half of the 20th century, like the consumer story, the idea that we all had agency, we could buy stuff and build a better life for ourselves, was a really liberating shift. I've had, like, you and I, a similar age, I think, and our mums are similar ages. I had some really big conversations with my mum where she was talking to me about her family's first washing machine was a Hot Point Liberator, and she was talking to me like these were items of the consumer era, right? And they were liberating, particularly for women, right? That was a massive thing for my mum and her family. And so I think it for that generation in particular, like, holding the consumer and the subject stories up to one another, they feel like they want to defend the consumer story, and I understand that. But the problem is that in this moment we're living in now, I think the consumer story is running out of gas, because the problems it has created, we can't solve them from within it. So one of the ways I talk about this is, like, we have we have an ecological crisis, and yet we're working to try and solve it from within a story and a society that says that accumulating material possessions is the path to happiness. We have an inequality crisis, and yet we have a story of society where the metaphor of what society is a kind of ladder that you climb. We're competing with one another because that's what consumers do. And most of all for you guys, and one of the reasons why Andy's Man Club, I think, absolutely, as you say, is bang in the citizen model, is we have a loneliness and mental ill health pandemic that actually, and we're trying to solve that most of the time from within a consumer story that says that we're isolated, independent individuals, and you just can't. So the reason why, like, when you got in touch and I looked up Andy's Man Club, and it's amazing. And I was looking at it, and this idea of building those peer-to-peer connections, like creating those safe spaces for blokes, and it's in the consumer story, it's particularly unacceptable for blokes who are supposed to be the breadwinners and the thing, and to find the vulnerability to kind of, okay, I'm not all right, actually. And I think that safety of space, the sort of light facilitation, ability for people to come together as equals and not be judged and just be heard, I think is absolutely in what I call the citizen story. It's this idea that we're not just there to be told what to do. We're also not just selfish. We're actually, like, we're creatures who need to be involved. We need to have agency. We need to be able to shape the context of our own lives. And when we can't do that, and so many of us can't in this time of cost of living crises and all of this, like, finding that agency can only be done collectively, can only be done with one another. And so spaces like those that Andy's Man Club creates are vital, right? That's how I would paint that picture.
Perfectly. And I think linking back into that as well, the other idea you've just given me there is, like, some of the debates I've had with my mum, and I think this will show like a wider problem as well, is that without consciously being aware of the book at present, some people revert back into that subject story. So they won't allow us to do this, they won't allow us to do that, they need to fix this, as if there is some form of elite that's managing us. But what would you say on that, John? Because when we look at the Man Club model, number of meetings I've been to where if we sat back and said, you know, none of us are mental health professionals, none of us, and one of our big things that we push with the Man Club is not being professionals, because if we're professionals, that creates an us and them, a subject story. Whereas if we are just one of them, one of the people there, just like you, and we're talking, how do we get people out of that subject story or seeing that they can actually be citizens? Because there's some great examples in the book. I don't know if you can paraphrase any of them, but there's some amazing examples, isn't there?
Yeah, like I said, I think you are in many ways already doing it. Maybe one of the stories I'll tell without talking to a bunch of guys from Hull about Grimsby too much, but which is dangerous, I think. But no, I'm really a fan of a lot of what's been going on just across the Humber. There's a wonderful organisation called East Marsh United in Grimsby that started out actually really just as one guy getting fed up in a meeting where everyone had come together to lament how rubbish everything was. And one guy stood up and said, do you know what, like, we can do something about this. We don't have to just talk about, what if I'm going to go and clean up a street tomorrow night? Who wants to come and join me, and we'll see what we can do, and we might go for a beer afterwards. And that, what started with that one kind of street cleanup and then met again 2 weeks later and again 2 weeks later, has now become, like, a year or two on from its beginning, it had become an organisation, like I say, called East Marsh United, and it had a fortnightly magazine called The Proud East Martian, and it had a 6-monthly arts festival kind of theatre. But a couple of years on from that, they've actually just run and successfully raised a £500,000 community share offer, which in Grimsby is enough money to buy 10 houses in the East Marsh, refit them using good local jobs, and then let them out as a social landlord at affordable rents, and create a sustainable revenue stream for the rest of the operation of the organisation. Now, what that is, to your thing about, like, how do we get out of thinking of subjects, is it's going, no one's coming to save us. We don't, like, that first meeting where Billy, his name is, got up and said this, like, the expectation of that meeting, it was hosted by a local councillor, and the mode that the councillor was in, to be honest, was a mode of, tell me what to do so I can go to the powers that be and stand up for you. No, screw that. Like, the power is in us, and the role that those people like councillors need to play is actually much more one of the facilitator. And to be fair to them, that now Grimsby councillors, I understand, is coming in behind East Marsh, and it's this. But this thing, it starts really, I think. He said to me, "Tell me what to do. Tell me what people need to do to be citizens, to find their agency as citizens." I think there's a kind of 3-step thing, really. The first thing is to decide what community, what place or community of interest, or whatever it is that you want to commit to, that you want to be a citizen of, that you're gonna make some change in, you're gonna find your agency in. The second step is find the others, because the critical thing about citizenship, and again, this is why I think Andy's Man Club speaks so powerfully to it, is that we aren't citizens alone, right? Like, you're citizens with others. So you find the others, and then you do something together. And then you keep doing, and that's like in East Marsh United story. That's the thing. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to stop talking, and we're going to go and see what we can do on one street in one night. And then once we've found, like, one of the ways, like, little metaphors, little visual images that I love is, a mate of mine, Stephen, talks about citizenship as being a muscle that you build, not a cup you empty. And he's a bit of a crazy American hippie. And he's, man, when you start using that muscle and you see yourself in the mirror and you like it and you want to use it more, and it gets a bit weird. But I think it's really powerful. It's once you start with this, you find it more and more. So really, that critical kind of first thing of finding the others and finding your agency together is huge. And again, like, without, like, over plugging you guys, but these spaces for that to happen have been so rare, because, as you say, kind of professionals providing services and fixing us has been the model we've been stuck in for so long, and it doesn't work.
Yeah. He explained it far better than I could, didn't he?
I tell you what, he explained it very well.
You're never speechless.
I'm never speechless. And just listening to John was fantastic there, and it does sum up what we're doing. The citizen, the way he's just explained that is absolutely brilliant. But I'm going to move on, and we're talking about books. I want to know what 1 to 3 books has greatly changed and influenced John's life.
This is going to be good.
Let's get Briand.
Here we go. No, I mean, to be honest, the book that really set me thinking more deeply was actually a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is a book from the mid-70s. Yeah, it's an amazing book.
Make sure I got that. The Zen of the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And
we've never had that one before, have we?
Never.
Oh, gosh.
100 podcasts. We've never once had that one.
You boys need to do a book club on that one. Basically, just to give you a taste, it's a philosophy book, but it's basically this guy. It's told through the story of a guy taking a road trip on a motorbike with his son. And the guy, the hero of the book, it's autobiographical. He is a philosopher. And he'd actually started to think about how screwed up the way the world works has been, and in about 10 years before writing the book, and he'd actually been institutionalized and had been given electroshock therapy. And through the course of the book, which is narrating this road trip, he reasserts himself and pieces back together his old thoughts, and tries to hold himself in a way that he can do that thinking safely. But it's this fabulous kind of and beautiful descriptions of like American landscapes and this kind of stuff. But it's also just this kind of it gave me a real confidence in seeing the world through a lens that said, actually, like, relationship to one another and starting from a perspective of care is far more important than all of the things that I'm surrounded by in my London ad agency and my supposedly good job and all of that stuff. So that was a book where it really began for me. And then maybe I'll give you one other, which is my now book. So if you're recording this visually, I'm going to hold up, because it's right beside me, a book called Sand Talk by an Aboriginal Australian guy called Tyson Yunkaporta. And the subtitle of the book is How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. And it's just a fabulous, it's really joyful and fun because he refuses to be trying to be a kind of white man intellectual philosopher, says me, but instead he's talking about like how we like what the relevance of like seeing the world through a lens that just refuses to be disconnected from it and recapturing some of that wisdom is. And it's right at the edge of it. At the end of last year, I did a big world tour, and I actually had the joy of meeting Tyson in person and hanging out with him. And he was just so like, the way he talks about the changes that the world needs to make and stuff was so common sense and so down to earth. And he was just like, do you know what? Like, humans don't forget how to be, the language he uses, the custodian species on this planet. Humans don't forget how to be that in a couple of 100 years. Aboriginal Australians have lived in the same way for 65,000 years on that continent. It's bonkers. And he was just talking from that place. He said at one point, when fruit flies engage in a project to grow a bigger dick, it takes them at least 10 life cycles. And I was like, I don't know quite where that came from, but I'm going to remember it. But yes, I really have a passion. I really love these books that have some pretty profound thoughts in them, but refuse to take themselves too seriously. And I hope that describes Citizens as well.
No, it does. I think you did a great job on that one. The next one,
yeah, I love that. That was a great answer. So jumping with the next question. So, what is your feel-good song or music that gets you focused or makes you happy?
So some other day, what would your come on stage track be if you won a big award? I like thinking of it like that. The answer I gave was Town Called Malice by The Jam.
Oh, tune.
I love this.
Which
I've got it on my phone.
Have you?
Yeah.
there we go. Good man.
You get anything with your Apple Music? He forgets this.
Yeah, you got Apple Music.
We've digitized him. We did something the other day. We all that little book up there, the 10 things. So we wrote this 10 technology trends that are shaping how we live, work, and play. And some of it's about AI. And we did a podcast on this the other week, didn't we, Dean? And we've digitized Paul's business, and we're going through it all. And because technically we look after his tech, he didn't realize that he's using all of the 10 things. But like then you don't realize you've got Apple Music on your phone. You've got every song.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, I've downloaded it and it's on my playlist. That's what I meant.
Okay, you can find that one.
I've got it. I'll tell you.
You be nice.
Yeah, tell him, John.
We're dragging him into the digital world, aren't we?
There we go.
Yeah.
It's happening.
I'm getting there.
But why that song then? Why that song particularly?
So I firstly is the first verse I just love. Stop apologizing for the things you've never done, because time is short and life is tough. But it's up to us to change this town called Malice. I just fucking love that vibe, right? But also I then discovered, and it's just a great tune as well, right? But then I discovered it was number one when I was born.
Oh wow!
Oh yeah.
In February 1982. So yeah, I decided that song is meant for me.
Love that one. Love it.
It's profound for me because it stops me falling off the treadmill because it's got a beat.
Is that, yeah. I'll to the next one. Oh, no, it's you, Nick, Paul. Sorry.
Yeah, it is. Right then, John, what purchase of £50 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last 6 months?
I'm not very good on purchases because I sort of don't buy that much stuff. But my best ones are all books. So I'm actually just going to riff back to Tyson Yunkaporta's book. Maybe the way I'll put it is I also bought an amazing breakfast sat by a river in a place called Warburton, just outside of Melbourne in Victoria in Australia. And I had met Tyson the day before, and I bought his book, and I went and spent the rest of the 50 quid allowance on a massive breakfast. And I sat there all morning, just myself, with a couple of decent coffees and this book by a river. And it was just a very special experience. So yeah, I hope that's some kind of answer.
No,
That's a cracking
that's a
answer.
correct answer. I'll to the next one. Do you have a lesson from a failure of yours?
Yeah, so when I first started developing these ideas, and I got out of the advertising industry, I had a pretty dark time actually when I was in advertising. I like staring at this thing of what are we doing to ourselves when we tell ourselves we're consumers constantly while working in an ad agency. Just was really hard. At one point, I don't actually, again, and this is probably why the Andy's Man Club work speaks so powerfully to me. I don't think I was actually, I don't know actually, looking back, I don't remember if I was really thinking about committing suicide myself, but I was definitely stood on the platform at Oxford Circus tube station feeling nauseous and looking at the ads, knowing what I did, knowing what question I was holding. I was physically sick that day, and it was a really dark and painful time. And this is I wanted to share this because it's you guys and this context, but coming to your question, when I came out of that, I've managed to find a more positive question, a more positive set of questions, this idea of bringing creativity to bear on involving people. The first idea I came up with was a thing called My Farm, and I managed to persuade a national trust to hand over decision-making on a real working farm to the public by online vote and debate. This is back in 2010. And it was a wonderful project, and it gave, but the problem and the big mistake I made was thinking that I could do it all myself. And thinking that if this was going to be a success, it was going to be me. And the lesson I learned, it nearly killed me and several animals, and it wasn't the best way to recover from a severe period of mental illness. But the lesson I learned out of the back of it was just how many complementary skill sets and different things, different people, different vibes you need to do anything that's worthwhile. And that doesn't make that, and realizing and seeing that as a realization that made me a bigger person, not a smaller one, because I needed other people was a big part of that. And it's why even in Citizens, I worked with many people, work with collaborators and researchers and so forth, and don't acknowledge them and sort of hide them away. I work with a woman called Ariana Conrad who's worked on books with lots of other authors who have never been on the front cover, and I said to her from the beginning, you're going to be on the cover because this is a team effort. The lesson I learned from that period was not only that you need others, but you need to acknowledge others in everything that you do.
You're nodding there, Dean.
Yeah, powerful answer. That I think it's one of the best answers we've had. Really backs everything what we do in here. We're growing a team out. There used to be two of us initially. The team's grown, but like I say, the weight of the job on your shoulders when you're trying to do a million things at once, one of the hardest things to do is let go and share that responsibility. But once you've mastered that, it's the best thing you could do.
John, I love that we record this because first I want to thank you for being vulnerable in what you said there.
Yeah.
And I'm going to come back to the point actually what you was making in a minute. I want to ask another question on that, John, and I think it's especially for men, we know men struggle to talk, but if you think about I've heard you talk about that in a bit more detail, but when you was making that change, you was in a hugely successful industry in big London town, the nice cars, the nice watches, the nice houses, And for you to stand on that platform, you was actually turning your back on all of your years' work, education, to go basically write a book and go change the world through a book, which when you think about it, I've read the book, so I made the right decision, but completely fear of the unknown. What would you say to anyone listening? Because we have a lot of people who listen who maybe don't like their own jobs. The story Dean's talking about there is, it was through Andy's Man Club that I actually resigned from a very successful position myself, and I became a 50% shareholder of this app called ThinkCloud now, and we've been going 20 years, and we had to change everything we did. But what would you say to people who maybe don't like the job and want to make a change? What advice would you give them?
I think, look, I certainly wouldn't do it the way I did it. For start, and I think what I would probably say now is there's a huge amount to be said for creating space, and even if that's like a day a week or a few hours a day, or like setting a space where you explore what else might be possible. Like, it's very hard to make a shift. And the reason why I said that as a bit of a joke, I said I wouldn't do it the way I did it, but really, because where I got to was a place where I had to drop out of it, and without anything to go to, and that is scary. If I was older at the time, and if I had kids, or if God only knows what I would have done. And so I think that thing of, there's this phrase which I think applies to the whole of society, but also to individual lives, which is, you can't have a major shift without something to shift to. You can't just shift from. And so I think my advice to anyone would I think be to start to try and create even a little bit of space where you can just start to build, experiment, explore the things you might want to do, but not just stare at the darkness, right? We've got to be building the bridge, not just staring into the chasm. And it's not easy to do, but
Yeah,
No, it certainly isn't.
brilliant
Love,
answer.
love,
Yeah.
love that answer. Thanks, John.
Great. I'm going to hit you with the next one. So, what is your favourite quote or saying that if you could share with everyone in the world, what is it and why?
I got so many that I was like postponing the decision about which to share. I love this stuff. I think the one I'm going to go with on the spot is Rebecca Solnit wrote a book called Hope in the Dark, and she has this definition of hope, and she says, optimism is the belief that things will be all right no matter what we do. Pessimism is the belief that, I'm slightly paraphrasing, pessimism is the belief that things will be shit no matter what we do. Both excuse us from action. And she says, hope is different. Hope exists in the spaciousness of uncertainty and the fact that we don't know what will happen. And in that fact lies the agency to shape the outcomes. It says hope equals clarity plus imagination, the clarity to see the troubles of the world for what they are, and the imagination to see how they can be different with our action. And I think that, like, I have paraphrased that, and it's a long one, but Solnit's ideas, like, the book is a little, again, and I've added another book, which is always the danger of me.
Book 3 though, so that you.
I'm still within
your
the
quarter.
boundaries. It's only like 80 pages long, and there's some lovely stuff in there. So there you go. Hope in the dark.
Well, interest on that, Dean. So Dean heads up our customer success. So his job day to day is making sure that all our customers are happy if the tech goes wrong. But what's quite interesting is his role now, because we've built a full team around him, and this is the first year you've put your orders in. You've got your orders first, haven't you? You're not covering, because he's the guy who, everything you used to have to go through. But interesting, that just quote around having hope to solve problems. I can see you nodding.
Yeah, just touching that. So me and Leon went for a run, didn't we? Was it Thursday last week?
You dragged me around, Dean.
We had dragged him around, but yeah,
I waddled.
We went for a jog for exercise. We was talking about work, and I think that day we actually hit a problem, and it's just that level of thinking, getting out of that mindset. At times I think we had a problem where we hit a brick wall. Technically, it couldn't be done. So it was like, actually, collectively, we've got some great minds in here. What can we do to get past this barrier? We need to think different. No is not an answer. We can push past this. We need to fix it. There must be an answer. And then collectively, we did it. We fixed it. But one person trying to fix this issue by himself hit a brick wall. But then collectively, we all came together and solved an issue. And it just 10 mans, 5 mans, whatever is better than one. And we spoke about that, didn't we, on the jog round? When you could catch your breath, that was.
Yeah, okay, I was good. Yeah. But I think thinking into that, though, John, and why it's good Dean's mentioned that is, like, a lot of your ideas, like we're talking about, and a lot of ideas that do change the world, I've been listening to a lot of, you'll definitely know he is, been in marketing, Rory Sutherland from, what's the name of the company? Ogilvy. Is it Ogilvy?
Yeah.
Ogilvy, sorry, yeah. And I love his slide. There's a slide that he does, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but he talks about when someone's successful, when someone's taken a risk, done something completely different, when it's success, people look back at it and say that there's a lot of like structure and process, and it was built on the shoulders of giants, right? And you get a pat on the back and everything's real good. If you try an idea that fails and it's got loads of logic and reason, right, and it fails, you get a pat on the back and you say, "Don't worry, it just hasn't worked out this time." If you come up with a completely crazy idea, and I'm going to use the Man Club one yet again, is let's not have any professionals in there. And the way we did it was everyone was saying that we're crazy for doing it. And it succeeded. Everyone thinks that we put loads of planning and logic in it, but actually, what we say is we only did it from a place of love, a place of doing something right. How do we empower people to change the world without having to be referenced, without having to be eating educated? The challenge you've got with this book is all the politicians, a lot of them come from a limited number of colleges, don't they? You know, a lot of them, I think it is majority of Eton. So how do you push? Because you're not from Eton, are you? Did you go to Eton? Yeah, but my point being is, how can you infiltrate that circle to put this opinion on?
I think maybe the thing I want to pick up on is what you're saying is Paul, is it? No, Dean. Sorry, Dean. Yeah, what Dean was saying about when you tap into the many different perspectives and the multiple, like that. The thing I think we most need to land is that. Like there's this phrase that I came across, and I can't remember where I did because I'd really like to credit it properly, but I've used it. It's a phrase that's all of us are smarter than any of us, and it's this idea. Tyson talks about it in his book. Actually, he's got this lovely thing where he says Aboriginal societies, as all Indigenous societies, have always realised that it's when you tap into all the diverse perspectives that you get the best ideas and the best insights. And I think that this is really fundamentally like the core of this idea of the citizen, of stepping into a citizen future, getting out of the subject or consumer stories. Both the subject story and the consumer story have implicit in them and embedded in them the idea that some are better than others. The subject story puts those who are better than others on the top, and like Eton College and all of that world is it's still there. Like a friend of mine was a teacher at Eton. Just a little aside for you, he went there as a teacher, and one day he got married, and a week or so after, he noticed that his pay packet had gone down a little bit. And he went and he asked why his pay had gone down a bit, and he was told, this was 2018. He was told that his ironing allowance had been removed because he'd got married. You're like,
wow,
oh my actual God, right?
Wow.
So so what you like, it's a little anecdote, but what you've got to understand is when you're conditioned in that worldview, like the challenge of opening up to a worldview that says actually the best outcomes come from tapping into the energy and ideas and resources of everyone is really immense. But it's also really immense to an adman. It's like deeply threatening to the power is a different kind of power. Like the adman, the professional social worker or whatever, perceives their role. They've been conditioned and trained to see their role as being to serve people, to have the answers for people, to be able to fix people for them. And that it's different, but in a way it's quite similar. It sort of flips things upside down, but it still says the answers lie in a few people, not in all of us. And I think so the deepest challenge of this is that shift, but it is hugely possible. And actually the really joyful thing is when you see, this is what we do as New Citizenship Project, my consultancy business, is we go into organizations, we help them go, what if you saw people as citizens? What if you saw everyone you work with as not just as customers who you need to serve, not just as and certainly not as subjects that you need to order around, but if you saw them as sources of ideas and energy and resource, like what might you be able to do if you're the Body Shop and you say, we want to unleash a generation of activists? What if you reframe the whole of the Body Shop as being a resource center for young activists, not just a cosmetics retailer? Like that, these things are really exciting and they're very possible, but it does require, as I say, it requires a really shift in thinking that is very hard from within either a conditioning that, as you say, too many of our political class have, which has conditioned them to believe that they are on high and better, or from a conditioning that we all have, I think, which, as I said at the beginning, this frame that says that asks the question, what are we doing to ourselves when we tell ourselves we're consumers 3,000 times a day? Like, when that story is so insistently around us that our agency is just to be served and to choose between stuff. Like, this is why it's possible and it's happening, and I'm super hopeful in many ways, particularly in the Solnit definition of hope, but it's difficult. It's a really deep challenge.
100% it is. 100%.
Yeah, I love that. Right then, John, in the last 5 years, what new habit or belief has had the most profound effect on your life?
It's in many ways, it's actually the reclamation of an old habit. Like the only thing I dreamed of being until I was 23 was an athlete. I used to row very seriously. So I didn't go to Eton, but I am quite posh, just to acknowledge it a bit. And so I did a posh sport. I did rowing, and I was pretty good at it. And I nearly made it, but I didn't. And then for a few years, I didn't have serious sport in my life. And then just in the last 5 years, I've got actually, the athlete identity is quite a big thing for me, and like embracing that part of myself again and making space for it and going running and getting on a bike and doing some triathlons and stuff. It's been really transformative, and I'm not trying to claim any, like, it sounds like a terribly like worthy one, but I think the lesson from it maybe is just like, remember what you love. And I thought I'd grown out of sport, and now I'm like, no, fuck it. Sorry, I keep swearing as well. But
It's fun. No, but I think the bit on that, we was having this debate on me. I think could have been cooped up for so long off the back of the pandemic, and then we've got all this uncertainty. I started playing. I'm 41, so I'm just a little bit older than you. And I started playing Masters rugby last year, Vets rugby, and and I've absolutely loved it. We've just started back at the gym again, and a few of our old rugby friends are going there, and we're meeting up. And I think what it is, even back to this citizen model again, like you're around people you enjoy, and you're having the dressing room was the funniest part last year. Don't get me wrong, the competing was good, but just the banter around the dressing room, we had completely missed it. And you forget, what I think is, you forget being a husband, father, dad, and you just become one of the boys, and you're just having a laugh and a bit of banter. And then I think also, when you're out there playing a sport, you've got to come together and you've got to help each other, and you've got every emotion. At the end of the day, it's all solved with a beer or a Coke or a non-alcoholic beer in the pub afterwards, isn't it? It matters for that hour, but it's not life critical, is it? And I think sometimes we forget to enjoy ourselves, don't we? I can see you nodding out, I think.
Yeah, no, same as me. Just was playing football June last year and literally walked onto the pitch, jumped up in the air. My Achilles snapped completely. And then for 4 months,
you'd be like a caged animal.
Yeah, you don't realize, like you say, you come to work, you do what you need to do, you see your family, but then there was that time, like Leon mentioned then, and I was coming home and I had this boot on my leg. I couldn't even get to work. I had to get picked up every day and dropped off. And when I wasn't allowed to do anything, and you sort of forget that actually the bits I do enjoy is just going out for a walk, or just going for a jog by myself, or enjoying the dressing room at football. You know, it's not about playing the football, it's about seeing other people. And I think like Leon said, we forget that sometimes, although we are back running now, aren't we?
I'm glad because he's injured. I can keep up with him. I think in the work you're doing mental health first aid training, that it's huge, isn't it, in terms of you're on a journey yourself and you keep battling. But I think a lot of people forget that, don't they? Again.
Yeah, I always say I'm on a journey physically and mentally, and I always tell people that I have bad days and bad hours, bad weeks, bad months, like I used to have. And going to the gym last week, we did 7 sessions, didn't we? I just felt alive last week. And it was over the Christmas period again, where you end up sitting in, doing a bit more, eating a bit more than you should do. And I felt my mental health dropping, but getting back out there, having a bit of my time, and like you say, meeting up, and you're accountable to each other because you won't let each other down. So that team spirit's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I just go out into companies and organizations and I try and help people by sharing my experience, which I always say I'll never work a day in my life again.
I love that. I think just give John the cover there, though. You have gone and got us training with an ex-professional boxer who is just intent in trying to kill us. I've had to buy an ice bath. I'm having ice baths in the morning now just to get the body moving. I'm going to be with the next one, not just a gym. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to yourself at 18, and what advice would you ignore?
I think in a lot of ways, the advice I give myself is back yourself. Like, you're all right. And I think it's easy because from where I am now, even so, what I'm doing at the moment, actually, with the thing I'm working on right now, is I'm working on the revisions, a few revisions to the book for the paperback edition. And it's really interesting just reading back over. I'm mainly going to be changing a bit of the opening and the closing of the book. And it's really interesting reading it and going, I didn't back myself enough, even in writing this book, which is a massively self-backing thing to do. Like, I didn't. And now, and I'm like, no, I like the experience, and part of it is just the experience of the last year and talking to people about it much more and realizing how much it resonates and speaking to guys like you and going, no, actually, this is important, and I've got something here, and it's also, and it's not self-indulgent to be doing it either. It's just it's something I'm giving, like, and people want, so I'm gonna really, but there is a bit of just back myself, like, you're all right, you can do this, and I think that's, and like, always be open to people calling you out and having a go, and find the sort of corollary of it. I guess the compliment to it is like, find the wisdom in every criticism you get. Like, those are the two things that I would hold at the same time. So both back yourself and paradoxically also listen to the criticism, because there will be, even the stuff you really disagree with, there'll be something in it. So those are my two that I would give myself at 18. The stuff I would ignore is basically all of the stuff that my bosses in Adland said. The biggest one was, I had a boss who said to me, you've got to give up on this stuff. Humorism's evolution. And humans, he said, humans, I remember the words, he said, humans are just nasty monkeys. And I was just like, and at the time, like, that was 2 years before I left the industry after that. And at the time I was like I'm a naive, idealistic muppet, and I need to just swallow it and get on. And now I'm like, no.
No, and I think what's so great is you're not taking that advice. But I think what's interesting, looking at what you're talking, hearing you say that, what's quite interesting though, I've been doing some research and advertising, and where my paths have crossed, I've landed in the sales and marketing seat in this business, haven't I? Because you and Scott don't want to do that bit, do you? But what's been really interesting, because I've been doing the Man Club side of it with psychology, it's just blown my mind in terms of some of the tactics and the stories that I use, like you say. But I think part of that is, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, even hearing you say you back yourself and step out. As humans, though, we don't want to step out. If we're in a school of fish, we want to be right in the center of it, don't we? We don't want to step out, and we want to comply, don't we? And marketers use all these dirty tricks, as I would say, to make us comply. I think we have to back ourselves. You've got to step out that now, because I think your book is an absolute masterclass. Honestly, I can't praise it enough. And I think together, if we are only going to change this world, if we do get off our asses and we do go do something about it. But on the flip side, and I love your bits of advice there, is criticism. I always think there's always an element of truth in any criticism. It might not be articulated with the nicest intentions, but there is always an element of truth what someone's saying. They just might not be articulated because they might say the red mist, might they? But yeah, love that one. Love that one.
Yeah.
It's the next one, Dana.
Yeah, John's going to eat with this one. At times, we all feel burnt out, unfocused, and unenergized. What do you do? What's helpful to bring you out of that state?
The short answer is one we've talked a bit about, which is do some sport, man. Go for a run, go for a swim, step away. I guess the slightly richer thing maybe to say is, I think just going, it's all right to feel that sometimes. Like, you can't be on fire all the time. You can't be always like hyper productive and nailing it, and no one is. I think that's a myth that I carried for quite a long time, and like maybe one of the weird things of hanging out with some people. I've met some of my heroes in the last year, and they all saying the same thing. Whether it's Brian Eno wrote the foreword for my book, and it's just the loveliest, most humble, delightful human being. Like, this guy produced most of the best music albums of the 20th century, right? Like, he produced all of Bowie, all of U2. Like, the guy's an absolute legendary genius. And he's like, man, I'm feeling rubbish today. And it's like, oh, cool. And it's just like, oh, right. Like, just because you feel a bit rubbish doesn't mean you are rubbish. So,
Totally agree.
Yeah, I like
And
that.
talking about legends and people who inspire you, who in the world would you like to interview, past or present, and why?
I found this question really hard when you sent it over to me, because I was like, I've actually spoken to most of them in the last year. It's been amazing. It's like Tyson and Brian Eno and this amazing woman Ece Temel Kıran, who's a Turkish writer and activist. But yeah, I'm gonna go. So if I'm gonna go a little bit cheesy as a result and say Nelson Mandela, because just that, right? Imagine decades in prison. And then coming out into that position of power and responsibility, and God, what would it be to understand that man as a human and as a peer and as someone you were face to face with? Wow,
I
that
think
would be
on that,
incredible.
I remember reading his book,
Get it.
and the bit what I took from it, where I always have hope that anything's possible, is the man's resilience when he just wanted to get in long trousers. He thought, if I can get in long trousers, I can't remember how many years it took him, but just to have the mindset, if I can get us in long trousers, we've got a hope to get out of the prison. And it's like,
Yeah,
wow,
Yeah.
how does he?
I remember you telling me that
Yeah,
one. Yeah,
ju-
it's amazing.
Just mind-boggling. So yeah, I'd be on that one with you. I think he's incredible. Yeah, incredible. We've got through the podcast, but we've done it on time. We got through an hour. But final sort of question: is anything we should have asked you, but we didn't?
I don't think so. I was trying to mull this. It's always a tricky question. I mean, maybe I'd love to just know from you guys, like, what's next, the Man Club? What are you most taking from the ideas that I've shared? If you've got any like reflections, it'd be lovely to close with that.
I think we always say we want to be there for that next man. We want to be there to get that next man through the door. And obviously, the statistics of suicide in the country, we want to get them statistics down, but we also want to create an Andy's Man Club so it's no more than 30 minutes from any man in the UK. And if we can do that, and any man can access it, because they can now. If they can't get through the door physically, they can go online on a Monday night. So there's no reason why no man can access Andy's Man Club, which we're going to carry on doing, and we're going to keep banging the drum. And the more we do that, the louder it'll get, and more people will listen, and more people will get through the door.
I think linking on to that is what's quite interesting is the way me and Paul work together is I'm there now setting the strategy across the big picture, then Paul's implementing it and feeding back. But what's been interesting is I think we set the vision to have 111 clubs, 1,100 clubs, right? 1,100. So that means that there's one within every 30 miles. But I think what's really interesting is I think what we are going to do is celebrate some of the smaller wins as well, because we was looking back we've got a trustee meeting scheduled later in the week, and there's some old minutes there where one of our targets was to get 150 men through the doors, and I remember we was getting 50 men through the doors. When we set the goal, the other trustees was like, that's more than double what we've got, and is that really realistic? And what was it, 80-something thousand?
Yeah, they'll be touching 3,000 men tonight come through the door at Andy's Man Club, which is absolutely fantastic. It's bittersweet. We'd like none because there won't be a need, but we know there is. We know there is. So 3,000 guys will get welcomed with open arms tonight to be able to talk in a non-judgmental environment where they feel safe.
I think it links back into what John mentioned. We have our sign is it's okay to talk, but we also have another sort of, we do speak at this, but we don't advertise it as much, do we? But it's okay not to be okay. And I think that is one of the thing I'm really personally passionate about in terms of banging that drum, in terms of being yourself, being authentic. And I think that's what we all need to be okay with not knowing all the answers, be okay with being vulnerable, and be okay with some people aren't going to get us. So for me, my goal this year is to be more authentic. Is my goal, and with that, bang the drum as loud as I can.
Yeah.
What yourself, Dean? What's your goals? Because
Yeah, to be fair, I think like my takeaway from this, what John mentioned, I like the bit where you mentioned you set out to achieve this with your name on it. It was a big goal. You wanted to do it yourself. You wanted your name there, but it just reflects back on really what we're doing as well. And it's like, to achieve something big, you need more minds and more heads, more bodies. You need people to collaborate and work together. And yeah, you're not always going to have the answers, but it's all right to reach out to other people who potentially have. And that way you can build bigger and better things.
I love it. And maybe one last reflection for you guys. I think one of the things that the consumer story does, I think, is it says that it's got a gloss finish implicit in it. It's like everyone you're trying to aspire to something like perfect, and no one is. And there's a lovely aspect that chatting with you guys is making me think about, in that an aspect of the Citizen story that I maybe need to bring out and talk about more, which is the sort of the beauty of its imperfection, right? Like the fact that we're all a bit rubbish. But we're all a bit brilliant too.
But
Like,
we're all a bit broken. And I think, but don't you think past pandemic, what I loved about the pandemic is we got to see people with the cats running behind,
Exactly
running
that.
in, or the meeting where you just had to put, how many of us had a meeting where we had a shirt on, our pajama bottoms on and slippers?
Shorts.
And I think we need to get back to that place and get away from that complete capitalism. Capitalism's got a place, hasn't it? It doesn't have to be as glossy. So yeah, I think you should go back and
I
rewrite
think
that.
John will have shorts on today, don't
He
you?
will have
There
definitely.
you go.
It looks like he's been out in the sun too much anyway, doesn't he?
Hey, there you go. There's a lovely thing that came from.
Joel, you've been brilliant.
You've been brilliant. I just want to thank you. So where can people find out more about you?
So I've got a website, johnalexander.net. I've got a little mailing list that I'm trying to figure out what to do with, and I'll be bouncing some ideas as to what I do next with this stuff off the back of the book as well. Come find me. You can find me LinkedIn, Twitter, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's been lovely to talk to you guys and great to hear more about the Man Club and about your work. And yeah, let's stay in touch, eh?
Brilliant,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
absolute pleasure, John. Thank you for accepting the invite.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate it. And keep doing what you're doing. I'm going to keep my eye on you. And yeah, looking forward to how this evolves into Citizens 2.0.
I'll let you guys know if I'm up near Grimsby again and I can get to the proper side of the Humber.
Yeah,
No problem.
Thanks, John. That's Leon checking out.
Paul checking out.
Dean checking out.
Thanks,
Bye.
John.
Cheers, boys.
Appreciate that.
Welcome to The Hack, the straight talking smart tech podcast where we discuss the ever changing world we live in today. It's time to start thinking differently. So tune in and buckle up for some home truths as Hull and East Yorkshire's very own digital tech experts talk transformation and change, focusing on people, process, and technology.